Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalists of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
A liberal religious community.
Welcoming.
Welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
It is now the time in our service where we turn inward, listening to what is on our hearts, quieting our minds and bodies and spirits so that we might hear. I invite you to stretch, to prepare your body for quiet, to take a posture of prayer or meditation, whatever helps you find that stillness. Whenever we approach prayer or silence, we often come with something on our minds. Today, I want to lift up Ann Mathis, longtime beloved member of this congregation. After a long illness, Ann passed away on Wednesday morning. Per her wishes, she was buried in a natural burial at Mount Auburn on Friday. She was an avid birder, and I like to imagine her spirit enjoying the sunshine and birds this morning. I now invite you to bring attention to yourself, to your own thoughts and whatever you might be holding this morning. Spirit of life and love, sometimes found in the rhythms of nature, sometimes found in a smile of one another, sometimes called God. Be with us now. We have been through highs and lows, the depths of Good Friday, the peak of Easter morning. We have walked through the valley of death. We have become intimate with despair. At times, it has wrapped itself around us, whether we want it to or not. Despair sometimes squeezing us so hard, our breath catches and constricts. We have been through highs and lows, and we will be there again. All our lives, we move through seasons. Times of illness, of grief, of worry. Some of us are thinking about aging parents. Some of us are worrying about the trans child we want to protect. Some of us are worrying about making ends meet. We have walked through the valley of death, and we know we will be there again. And yet we also know Easter morning. We know joy so tender and precious, it feels miraculous. We have had the gift of daffodils blooming in abundance, the delight of upcoming weddings and new chapters. Holy One, may we each know joy. May we teach ourselves to find it in unexpected places. We live in a world of empire, of war and climate change. There are reasons to despair. But may we not forget Easter morning. In times of grief and violence, may we be Easter people, seeking out joy, trusting it will come again. Even as tears may flow, may we be Easter morning people. Hope arrives, hope rises, hope is here. As we settle into 2 minutes of silence, as we connect with our breath, may the miracle of goodness and delight surround us.
He employed models who were pickpockets, swindlers, and street performers, ordinary people. He set his backgrounds in shadow and intensified the light on the central figures and action. And the figures were usually life-sized. The paintings were filled with dramatic tension. The late 1500s and early 1600s marked the beginning of the Baroque era in art. And the Italian painter Caravaggio is known for his lush realism and immediacy. Years ago, my sister of blessed memory, then living in New Jersey, took her 2 young sons to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Max was in a stroller, and Brent, then 5 or 6, held his mother's hand. On the wall were paintings by Caravaggio of the Passion Week. Brent walked up to get a closer look of the night in the garden, the kiss of Judas, the whipping of Jesus while he is tied to a Roman column, the raising of the cross, and the disciples lifting up and placing his body in the tomb. Brent broke the customary silence of the museum and loudly asked, "What did he do?" My sister, suddenly now parent as resident theologian, said, "He said things people didn't like." Brent paused and then unabashedly asked, "Why didn't they just send him to his room?" Why didn't they just send him to his room? A 6-year-old turned his fear and horror into mercy and compassion. From the mouths of babes comes great clarity. How far do we need to go to exact punishment? And when should our anger and fear be tempered? Today is Easter Sunday, and I begin by admitting that Easter can be a problem. This year, Easter comes in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. Almost 6 months later, Hamas continues to hold 124 Israelis hostage. And Israel has been unrelenting in its attacks on Gaza, resulting in the deaths of some 30,000 people. This year, Easter comes amidst a time of rising hate here in our own country. Since October 7th, the number of reported anti-Semitic incidents has tripled, and reports of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab hate incidents have doubled. The Easter story is not tangential to this hatred and violence. For centuries, Easter and Holy Week have been a time of increased hate. Last Friday and on Good Friday for nearly 2,000 years, the Gospel of John was read in churches. The Gospel of John persistently uses the phrase, the Jews, to describe those who conspired to kill Jesus. The Gospel of John shifts the blame for the death of Jesus from Roman authorities to the Jewish people as a whole. But it isn't so. Crucifixion was a distinctly Roman form of execution, reserved for criminals and for those who politically threatened the empire. Blaming the Jews for Jesus' execution represents a willful distortion of history. Jesus' primary conflict was not with Judaism, but with the occupying Roman Empire. Indeed, the anti-Jewish slant in parts of the Gospels has led many to remember Jesus, or rather misremember him, as if he were not a Jew at all. For centuries, spurred by the tale as told in the Gospel of John, people took to the streets during Holy Week, attacking Jews and their homes. It was a week of persecution and pogroms. Indeed, some of you tell me that as children growing up, Holy Week was the time that you were most taunted for being Jewish. Easter can be a problem in ways both cultural and theological. I grew up a skeptic, but going to theological school opened my mind and my heart. The dorm room I was assigned to my first day in graduate school was painted blue, a deep sky blue. The walls, the molding, the ceiling. It was going to get old fast. And so I was ready to paint. My next door neighbor down the hall reached the same conclusion about his room. And so I, a child of the Northeast, wound up painting alongside a man from Arkansas. While we painted, he said to me, "I've never met a feminist before." And I said, "I've never met a Southern Baptist before." We smiled through our mutual trepidation. We were both going to be stretched. I dipped my paintbrush in the can and asked the question, "Do you believe in the resurrection? Do you believe that actually happened? Do you ever doubt?" For those of you that may not know me, I can be direct. He dipped his brush in the same can of paint and turned to the wall. He said, "I do doubt, but this is what I've decided. It goes back to a story in the Gospel of John. It's after the crucifixion, and some of the disciples go fishing, but they catch nothing. And then a figure appears who they do not recognize as Jesus, and he says, 'Cast your net off the right side of the boat.' And of course, they are doubtful. They've just spent hours fishing and have caught nothing. But they do it anyway. They cast their net, and they wind up dragging the net full of fish. So my neighbor said, I've decided that when I'm feeling doubtful, I can cast my net anyway. You never know. You never know. Now, this fishing scene is called an appearance story. Contrary to popular depictions, there is no one resurrection scene. Instead, there are these appearance stories in the Gospels, 10 in all. And they're each very different, and they all occur a short time after Jesus' death, and they occur to only a small group of people, 2 or 3, never more than a dozen, and only to people who knew Jesus well. And most of the time, Jesus is not recognized at first for who he is. I wonder, how many of us have had a sense of someone's presence after they died? How many of you have felt someone near who is now gone? My grandmother had several African violets she could not get to bloom. She watered more and then less. She moved them to different locations in her city apartment, giving them more or less light, and still the small purple flowers would not come. Several days after she died, my mother and I went to her city apartment, and the African violets were blooming. Stranger things have happened. How very many of us have such stories to tell. And I wonder, how do we counter the inexplicable? We can rationalize it away. We can minimize it. We can sweep it under the carpet. Or we can embrace it as wondrous. A 6th grader once wrote the great physicist, "Dear Dr. Einstein, do scientists pray?" And the physicist wrote back, "I will attempt to reply to your question as simply as I can. Scientists believe that every occurrence is due to the laws of nature. Therefore, a scientist cannot believe that the course of events can be influenced by prayer, that is, by a supernaturally manifested wish. However, we must conclude that our actual knowledge of these forces is imperfect. Many seriously involved in the pursuit of science become convinced that some spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe. In this way, the pursuit of science leads to a religious feeling of a special sort. With cordial greetings, yours, A. Einstein." What do we do with our doubts? We can give them all our attention, or we can give ourselves to possibility. We can cast our nets. There are at least two kinds of doubt, one of the head and one of the heart. When we experience doubt of the head, we argue, we rationalize, we employ reason, as if sense and rationality were the only valuables in a world where beauty appears for no reason, people fall in love, and unearned kindnesses ease our way. But a more problematic doubt is that of the heart. When we experience doubt of the heart, we cry out as Jesus did, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus was not raising a theological question as much as he was looking into the abyss, speaking the words of the psalmist, and lingering there for a time. Have you lingered there as well? Sailors have an expression about the weather. They say the weather is a great bluffer. The weather is a great bluffer. Things can look dark, and then a break shows on the clouds, and all is changed, sometimes rather suddenly. It is quite obvious that the human race has made a mess of life on this planet. But as a people, we harbor seeds of goodness that have lain for a long time, waiting to sprout when conditions are right. Our curiosity, our relentlessness, our inventiveness, our ingenuity has led us into deep trouble. But faith tells us that these same traits may yet enable us to claw our way out. The mystic and Martin Luther King's spiritual director, Howard Thurman, spoke of what he called the glad surprise. There is something compelling and exhilarating about a glad surprise. It carries with it the elements of elation, of something over and beyond the surprise itself. Cast your nets. You may yet be surprised. A Zen master taught, the seed never sees the flower. The flowers of spring come to us as a glad surprise. You know, when our hearts are steady and we are in our right minds, we know that transcendence sparks and crackles all about us, in a child's voice, in the warmth of a fire, and in shared tears. I have a friend who finds the hand of the holy in the habits and the coloring of birds. Another tells me that when her first child was born, she discovered what she calls a love much greater than evolution requires. I like that. A love much greater than evolution requires. The Buddhist Sharon Salzberg says, faith is not a set of beliefs, but the act of opening our hearts to the unknown. Faith, then, is about opening, connecting, participating, and moving forward. Faith is also an opening of ourselves to others, recognizing that you and I are not alone, no matter how alone we may feel. The Buddhist tradition tells of looking at the sky through a straw. We each look at the sky through our particular straw, and we think, wow, how big, how vast. And we get attached to our straw, and we compare our straw to other people's. Mine's wider, mine has a better design on it. We hold on very tightly to the straw. That's like holding on to a belief. It's just one angle of the truth. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of faith, actually, to let go of that straw and just look nakedly at the sky. And then we can say, oh, how magnificent. Life is not about certainty. It is about possibility. Cast your net. After the disciples cast their net, after they hauled the fish, they returned to the shore, and the man on the shore, who they did not recognize as Jesus, said, "Come, have breakfast." And the story goes that Jesus took bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. It was something so simple, so natural. After a shift in the lab, a scientist at Yale University, a marine ecologist, decided to go to chapel at the Yale Divinity School. The community held hands and sang and passed around bread and wine. Wine, grape juice, fruit of the vine, is 85% water. These same drops of hydrogen and oxygen have existed since the start of creation, cycling through clouds and oceans and streams and bodies. And bread is made from complex chains of carbohydrates and nutrients like calcium, phosphorus, and iron. These molecules are hewn from the earth, cycled from rock to sand to soil to biomass. And when we eat, these minerals assimilate into our bones and blood, constantly rebuilding and restructuring our inner architecture. Each bite of bread becomes an affirmation of union. Through the sharing of bread, we remember in our bodies that we belong. Through the crumbs in our mouths, we taste and touch a union. So cast your nets. Remember that the weather is a great bluffer. Open your heart as a child encountering the crucifixion, the pain of the world for the first time. And behold, a glad surprise. Our nets may yet be full. Amen.